November 2011. Leroy, New York. A small town, population 7,500. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone. A teenage girl starts twitching. Her arms jerk involuntarily. Her head snaps to the side. She develops a stutter, can't control her movements. Her parents rush her to doctors. Nobody can find anything wrong. No infection, no toxins, no neurological damage. Nothing. Then her friend develops the same symptoms. Identical twitching. Same involuntary movements. Then another girl. Then another. Within weeks, 12 teenage girls and one boy in the same school district are experiencing the exact same mysterious symptoms. Their bodies are convulsing, twitching, jerking. Some are stuttering so badly they can't speak. Some are having what look like seizures. The doctors run every test imaginable. Blood work, brain scans, environmental testing. They're looking for a virus, a bacteria, a toxin in the water, something. Anything. They find nothing. Because there's nothing to find. The illness is real, the girls are genuinely suffering. Their symptoms are not fake. But there's no pathogen, no poison, no physical cause. It's spreading through the power of the mind. One person's symptoms triggering identical symptoms in others through a psychological mechanism we still don't fully understand. This is called mass psychogenic illness. And it's not rare. It's not ancient history. It's happening right now all over the world. Entire schools suddenly struck by identical mysterious symptoms. Factory workers simultaneously developing seizures. Whole towns convinced they're being poisoned when medical tests show nothing. The symptoms are real. The suffering is real. But the cause isn't biological, it's psychological. And that might be even more disturbing than if it were a virus. Because if the mind can make dozens of people simultaneously sick with identical symptoms, what else can it do? Mass psychogenic illness used to be called mass hysteria. But that term is problematic. It's stigmatizing and historically was used to dismiss, particularly women's, legitimate concerns. Modern medical terminology uses mass psychogenic illness or MPI. Here's what it is. A phenomenon where a group of people develop similar physical symptoms with no identifiable physical cause. The symptoms spread through social networks and are triggered by psychological factors, particularly stress and anxiety. And here's what it's not. It's not fake. It's not people pretending to be sick. It's not all in their heads in the dismissive sense. The symptoms are real. The people experiencing them are genuinely suffering. The twitching in Leroy was real twitching. The fainting spells at schools are real loss of consciousness. The breathing difficulties are genuine respiratory distress. But the cause is psychological rather than biological. Think of it like this: your brain controls your body. When you're anxious, your heart races. That's real tachycardia caused by your psychological state. When you're terrified, you might vomit. That's real physical vomiting triggered by emotion. Mass psychogenic illness is an extreme version of the same mind-body connection, amplified by social factors. MPI outbreaks have consistent patterns. Recognizing these patterns is how doctors distinguish MPI from actual infectious disease or toxin exposure. Pattern 1. It spreads by sight. People who witness others having symptoms are most likely to develop symptoms themselves. If you separate the group, the symptoms often stop spreading. Pattern 2. It affects specific demographics. Most commonly adolescent girls and young women, though it can affect any group under stress. It particularly strikes in closed communities, schools, factories, convents, military units. Pattern 3. The symptoms are diverse. Unlike a real pathogen that causes consistent, specific symptoms, flu causes fever, cough, body aches, MPI symptoms vary wildly. Fainting, twitching, seizures, nausea, headaches, breathing problems, all in the same outbreak. Pattern 4. Medical tests find nothing. No virus, no bacteria, no toxins, no physiological abnormality that would explain the symptoms. Pattern 5. It resolves when stress decreases or the group is separated. Once people are removed from the triggering environment and reassured, symptoms typically fade. Pattern 6. Symptoms match the group's fears. If people are worried about contamination, they develop nausea and breathing problems. If they're worried about neurological illness, they develop twitching and seizures. The mind creates symptoms that match what the person believes is making them sick. So how does this actually work? How can the mind create genuine physical symptoms? Your brain is constantly monitoring and controlling your body. Your heart rate, breathing, digestion, muscle tension, all of it is regulated by your nervous system, controlled by your brain, usually below conscious awareness. When you're stressed or anxious, your brain activates your sympathetic nervous system, the fight or flight response. This causes real, measurable physical changes. Increased heart rate, rapid breathing, muscle tension, redirected blood flow, heightened sensory perception. In normal circumstances, once the threat passes, your parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and returns your body to normal. But in conditions of chronic stress, this system can malfunction. Your body stays in a heightened state. Small triggers can cause disproportionate physical responses. Now add social factors. Humans are intensely social creatures. We're wired to mimic each other, to sync with the people around us. When we see someone in distress, our brains automatically simulate their state to help us understand what they're experiencing. This is empathy at a neurological level. In high-stress environments, this mimicry can go haywire. When one person develops symptoms, others who witness it unconsciously begin to manifest the same symptoms. It's not deliberate. It's not conscious. Their brains are creating symptoms as a response to stress, fear, and the social contagion of seeing others in distress. The symptoms are as real as any caused by a virus. But the etiology is psychological. You might be thinking, okay, so it's psychological, people recover, what's the big deal? The big deal is that MPI outbreaks cause genuine suffering, massive disruption, and often lead to witch hunts for non-existent causes. Communities tear themselves apart looking for toxins that don't exist. Schools shut down. Families sue. Reputations are destroyed. And most insidiously, because the symptoms are real, and because we live in an age of medical testing that promises to find causes for everything, people refuse to believe the diagnosis of MPI. They're convinced there must be a physical cause. So they keep searching, keep testing, keep treating symptoms that won't respond to medical treatment because the treatment they need is psychological. Understanding MPI isn't about dismissing people's suffering. It's about correctly identifying the cause so people can actually get help. Let's start with one of the most famous historical cases. Strasbourg, 1518. A woman named Frau Trophia begins dancing in the street. Not normal dancing, convulsive, uncontrollable dancing. She dances for days. Then others join her. Within a week, 34 people are dancing. By the end of the month, approximately 400 people are caught in this compulsive dancing. They dance until they collapse from exhaustion. Some dance until they die from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer physical exhaustion. For centuries, this was a complete mystery. Theories ranged from demonic possession to ergot poisoning, a fungus that can cause convulsions. But modern analysis suggests this was a mass psychogenic illness triggered by extreme stress. 1518 Strasbourg was suffering from famine, disease, and poverty. The population was under enormous psychological strain. The dancing likely started as one person's stress response, then spread through the community as others witnessed it, and their own stressed minds latched onto the behavior. The authorities' response? They built stages and hired musicians, thinking the dancers needed to dance it out. This made it worse. It reinforced the behavior and gave it social sanction. The dancing continued for months until authorities finally separated the dancers and the stress began to ease. Fast forward to 1962, a textile factory in North Carolina. One morning, a worker is bitten by an insect. She develops nausea, numbness, and dizziness. She's sent home. Over the next few days, 62 workers, almost all women, develop identical symptoms. They're convinced there's an insect infestation in the fabric they're working with. Some workers report seeing bugs. Others report being bitten. The factory is shut down. Extensive investigation begins. Entomologists search for insects. Toxicologists test the fabrics and dyes. Medical doctors examine the workers. They find nothing. No insects. No toxins. no pathogen, no physical cause for the symptoms. But the symptoms were real. Workers genuinely felt nauseous, dizzy, numb. Some fainted. This wasn't mass pretending. The investigators concluded it was mass psychogenic illness. The triggering factor? The factory had recently increased production quotas. Workers were under intense pressure, working longer hours in stressful conditions. When one worker got sick, others under the same stress developed identical symptoms. The June bug epidemic has become a classic case study in occupational health. It demonstrated that workplace stress can manifest as physical illness that spreads through a workforce like a contagion. March 1990. Kosovo, part of Yugoslavia at the time. At a high school in the town of Pajevo, students suddenly begin collapsing. They're experiencing headaches, dizziness, breathing difficulties, nausea. Within hours, hundreds of students are affected. The school evacuates. Ambulances rush victims to hospitals. Panic spreads. There are rumors of poisoning, of gas attacks. The symptoms spread to other schools. Within days, thousands of ethnic Albanian students across Kosovo are reporting identical symptoms. The political situation is tense. Kosovo's Albanian majority is chafing under Serbian rule. Ethnic tensions are high. Investigators search for a cause. Chemical weapons? Environmental toxins? Contaminated food? They test everything. Multiple international teams investigate. They find nothing. No toxins. No gas. No poison. Nothing that could cause these symptoms in thousands of people. The conclusion: mass psychogenic illness, triggered by the extreme stress of living under ethnic and political tension. Albanian students were under enormous psychological pressure. When symptoms started at one school, they spread through a community already primed by stress and fear. But here's where it gets complicated. Many people, particularly in the Albanian community, refused to accept this diagnosis. They were convinced it was a Serbian attack that investigators were covering up. The diagnosis of MPI was seen as political, as another way of dismissing Albanian suffering. This illustrates one of the biggest challenges with MPI. Telling people their symptoms are psychological feels like dismissal, even when the diagnosis is accurate and meant to help them get appropriate treatment. Let's return to Leroy, where we started. 12 teenage girls and one boy, all in the same school district, all developing identical twitching, seizures, and verbal tics. The community demanded answers. Environmental activists arrived, convinced there were toxins from an old chemical spill decades earlier. News media descended. The story went national. Celebrity activists got involved, claiming the doctors were covering up environmental poisoning. The doctors ran exhaustive tests. They tested for infections, autoimmune diseases, brain lesions, PANDAS, a condition where strep infections trigger neurological symptoms, Lyme disease, environmental toxins, heavy metals, everything. All negative. Every test came back normal. The diagnosis: conversion disorder, a type of psychogenic illness. The doctors proposed that the students were under intense stress, small town, limited opportunities, social pressure, academic pressure, and their brains were manifesting that stress as physical symptoms. The community largely rejected this diagnosis. Parents were furious. They felt their children were being dismissed, called crazy. Environmental activists insisted there must be a physical cause. But here's the thing: the doctors were right. As students were separated, given psychological treatment, and stress was reduced, symptoms began to resolve. Some took months, but they recovered. One girl's symptoms started after she experienced a traumatic event. Her friends, worried about her and stressed themselves, began developing similar symptoms. It spread through their social network like a virus, but it was a psychological contagion, not a biological one. This is the most controversial modern case. Starting in 2016, U.S. and Canadian diplomats in Havana, Cuba began reporting strange symptoms. Headaches, dizziness, cognitive problems, hearing strange sounds. The initial theory: a sonic weapon, some kind of directed energy attack. The symptoms spread to other diplomatic posts: China, Russia, Austria. Hundreds of U.S. government personnel reported similar symptoms. This became a major international incident. Theories ranged from Russian microwave weapons to mass psychogenic illness. The debate became intensely politicized. Multiple studies have been conducted. Some found evidence of brain changes. Others found nothing. The National Academy of Sciences suggested directed microwave energy as a possible cause. But other researchers have argued the evidence points to mass psychogenic illness combined with everyday ailments being retroactively attributed to the syndrome. As of 2024, the cause remains officially undetermined. U.S. intelligence agencies have concluded that most cases are not the result of foreign attacks. Many medical researchers believe a significant portion of cases represent MPI, though this diagnosis remains politically fraught. The Havana syndrome case illustrates how difficult it is to diagnose MPI when there are political implications, when victims are high-status individuals, diplomats, not schoolgirls, and when accepting a psychological explanation feels like weakness. Some of the most common modern MPI outbreaks are triggered by fear of vaccinations. This is a pattern seen repeatedly across the world. In 2013, in Carmen de Bolivar, Colombia, hundreds of girls developed symptoms after receiving HPV vaccines. Fainting, seizures, difficulty walking, numbness. The symptoms were real. The fear was intense. Parents were terrified. The media amplified the panic. Extensive investigation found no link between the vaccine and the symptoms. Testing showed the vaccine was safe, properly stored, correctly administered. What investigators did find: a population primed by misinformation about vaccine dangers, experiencing symptoms triggered by anxiety about vaccination. Similar outbreaks have occurred after vaccination campaigns in Mexico, Denmark, Japan, and other countries. The pattern is always the same. Intense media coverage of vaccine concerns. First person develops symptoms, often a genuine adverse reaction like fainting from the needle stick or anxiety. Others who witnessed it or heard about it develop similar or escalating symptoms. Panic spreads. Medical investigation finds no biological cause. This is particularly tragic because these outbreaks damage public health efforts. Vaccination programs get suspended. Populations become convinced vaccines are dangerous. Disease prevention suffers. And the people experiencing symptoms don't get the psychological treatment that would actually help them. A newer phenomenon: schools reporting outbreaks of symptoms allegedly caused by Wi-Fi signals or cell phone radiation. In various schools across Europe and North America, students have reported headaches, nausea, concentration problems, and other symptoms they attribute to electromagnetic radiation from Wi-Fi routers or cell towers. The scientific consensus is clear. At the power levels used for Wi-Fi and cellular communications, electromagnetic radiation does not cause these symptoms. Double-blind studies consistently show that people who claim sensitivity to electromagnetic fields cannot actually detect when the fields are present. But the symptoms are real. Students genuinely feel sick. The mechanism appears to be nocebo effect, opposite of placebo, expecting harm causes harm, amplified by social contagion. When one student becomes convinced Wi-Fi is making them sick and develops symptoms, others become hyper-aware of their own bodily sensations. Normal variations in how you feel throughout the day, slight headache, mild fatigue, get attributed to the Wi-Fi. Anxiety about the Wi-Fi then triggers genuine stress symptoms. Other students see this happening and develop similar symptoms. Schools have removed Wi-Fi equipment in response to these outbreaks. But the symptoms don't disappear because Wi-Fi wasn't actually causing them. Here's a disturbing modern twist: social media-induced MPI. In 2019 to 2021, doctors noticed a surge in teenage girls developing sudden-onset Tourette's-like tics. These weren't gradual, developmental tics like in typical Tourette syndrome. These were sudden, explosive, dramatic tics that appeared overnight. The pattern was striking. The tics resembled the tics of popular Tourette syndrome content creators on TikTok and YouTube. Specific phrases, specific movements, identical across patients who'd never met each other. Neurologists recognized this as mass psychogenic illness spreading through social media. Teenagers under stress from the pandemic, social isolation, and online life were unconsciously mimicking the tics they watched in videos. The symptoms were genuine, they really were twitching and experiencing tics. But the cause was psychological, triggered and shaped by social media content. This represented something new, MPI spreading not just through physical proximity but through digital social networks. You don't need to be in the same room to be affected. You just need to watch the same videos, be part of the same online community. Treatment required reducing social media exposure to TIC content and addressing the underlying stress. Many patients recovered when they stopped watching TIC videos and received psychological support. Beyond these well-documented cases, there are ongoing clusters of unexplained illness that may represent MPI but remain controversial. A diplomatic community develops headaches and cognitive problems. A school near a factory has students with respiratory symptoms. A neighborhood near a landfill reports cancer clusters. How do you distinguish genuine environmental illness from MPI? This is where medical investigation becomes crucial and controversial. Real environmental illness has specific patterns. The symptoms match the toxin. They're dose-dependent. People closer to the source or with more exposure are sicker. They appear in predictable demographics, not just teenage girls. They persist even when people are separated. Medical tests show objective abnormalities. MPI has different patterns. Symptoms are diverse and don't match a specific toxin. They spread by social network, not by proximity to an environmental source. They predominantly affect people under stress, particularly adolescent females. Medical tests are normal. Symptoms resolve with separation and reduce stress. But these distinctions aren't always clear-cut. And suggesting MPI when a community is convinced there's environmental poisoning is guaranteed to create conflict. If you're noticing a pattern, these outbreaks seem to be increasing, you're right. Modern MPI outbreaks are more common and spread faster than historical cases. Why? Reason 1, stress. Modern life, particularly for adolescents, involves intense psychological pressure. Academic competition, social media comparison, economic uncertainty, climate anxiety, pandemic stress. Adolescent mental health is in crisis. MPI thrives in high-stress environments. Reason 2, connectivity. Social media allows symptoms to spread globally, instantly. A teenager in Sweden can watch videos of someone twitching in America and unconsciously develop the same tics. Historical MPI was limited by geography. Modern MPI spreads at digital speed. Reason 3, health anxiety. We live in an age of accessible medical information and heightened health consciousness. People are more aware of symptoms, more likely to attribute normal variations to serious causes. This hypervigilance, combined with stress, creates fertile ground for MPI. Reason 4, distrust. Declining trust in institutions means people are less likely to accept official explanations. When doctors say it's psychological, many people hear it's not real or they're covering something up. This makes MPI outbreaks harder to resolve. Imagine you're a doctor. A teenage girl comes to your office. She's twitching uncontrollably. She can't make it stop. She's terrified. Her parents are demanding answers. You run tests. Everything comes back normal. You see that 12 of her classmates have identical symptoms. You recognize the pattern. This is almost certainly mass psychogenic illness. Now, what do you tell her? If you say it's psychological, she and her parents may feel dismissed. They may refuse treatment. They may doctor shop until they find someone who'll tell them it's a toxin, an infection, anything with a real physical cause. If you say, we don't know what's causing this, you leave them in limbo, afraid and searching for answers that don't exist. If you say, let's try psychological treatment, they may resist because accepting that diagnosis feels like admitting they're crazy or weak. This is the central challenge of treating MPI. The correct diagnosis can be harder for patients to accept than a serious physical illness would be. When MPI is correctly diagnosed and appropriately treated, most people recover. But treatment requires separation, removing affected individuals from the triggering environment and from each other. This stops the social contagion. Reassurance, medical testing to rule out physical causes, then clear communication that while symptoms are real, the cause is stress-related and treatable. Stress reduction. addressing the underlying stressors that made the person vulnerable to MPI in the first place. Psychological treatment, cognitive behavioral therapy, stress management, sometimes medication for anxiety or depression. Avoiding reinforcement, not constantly focusing on symptoms, not seeking endless medical testing that reinforces the belief that something is physically wrong. Most importantly, validating that the symptoms are real while explaining that the mechanism is psychological. This is a delicate balance. Dismiss the symptoms and the patient won't trust you. Over-investigate and you reinforce health anxiety. In Leroy, the students who accepted psychological treatment and reduced their stress gradually recovered. Took months for some, but symptoms faded. Some students never accepted the diagnosis. They continued to believe they'd been poisoned by environmental toxins. Some still have symptoms years later. The difference between those who recovered and those who didn't often came down to acceptance of the diagnosis and willingness to address psychological factors. This doesn't mean their symptoms were fake or that accepting "it's in your head" was easy. It means that once they understood the mind-body mechanism and received appropriate treatment for their underlying stress and anxiety, their brains stopped producing the symptoms. Mass psychogenic illness reveals something profound about human consciousness and society. We are not isolated individuals. We are deeply interconnected, our brains constantly syncing with the people around us. In the right conditions, high stress, close social bonds, shared fears, this interconnection can cause our bodies to mirror each other's distress. This isn't weakness. It's not mental illness in the traditional sense. It's an extreme version of normal human psychology, the same mechanisms that allow us to empathize, to feel others' pain, to coordinate as social groups. But in a modern world of constant stress, instant communication, and health anxiety, these mechanisms can misfire. Our brains, evolved for different environments, sometimes create symptoms as responses to psychological threats. Understanding this doesn't diminish the reality of suffering. It illuminates it. It shows us that the mind-body connection is more powerful than we typically acknowledge. That psychological stress can create genuine physical illness. That we're more vulnerable to social contagion than we'd like to believe. MPI isn't going away. As long as humans live in stressful conditions and form social groups, we'll see outbreaks of psychogenic illness. What changes is how we respond. Better recognition means faster, appropriate treatment. Better mental health support reduces the underlying stress that makes people vulnerable. Better science communication helps people understand that psychological doesn't mean not real, but we also need to grapple with the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes, entire communities become convinced of explanations that aren't true. Sometimes, symptoms that feel undeniably physical have no physical cause. Sometimes, the mind creates realities that medical tests cannot detect. Most of the Leroy students recovered. They finished high school, moved on with their lives. Some still struggle with health anxiety. Some still believe they were poisoned. The town remains divided. Some residents accept the psychological explanation. Others are convinced there was a cover-up, that toxins were never properly investigated, that their children were dismissed and ignored. There's no neat resolution because mass psychogenic illness doesn't offer neat resolutions. It reveals the complicated relationship between mind and body, between individual experience and social reality, between what feels true and what testing can prove. Mass psychogenic illness teaches us that the mind is powerful enough to create symptoms indistinguishable from real physical illness. The symptoms are real, caused by psychological mechanisms rather than pathogens, but equally genuine in their impact. We are social creatures whose brains sync in ways we don't consciously control. What we witness in others, our brains may unconsciously reproduce in ourselves. Modern life, stress, connectivity, health anxiety, creates perfect conditions for MPI. We're likely to see more outbreaks, not fewer. The hardest part isn't diagnosing MPI. It's getting people to accept the diagnosis without feeling dismissed. Right now, somewhere in the world, a teenager is developing unexplained symptoms. Tomorrow, her friends will start showing the same symptoms. Within a week, a dozen students will be affected. Medical testing will find nothing. Panic will spread. Parents will demand answers. The community will fracture between those who accept psychological explanations and those who are certain something is being covered up. This is happening right now. It will happen again tomorrow, and next month, and next year. Mass psychogenic illness is real. It's ongoing. It's a reminder that the line between mind and body is far blurrier than we're comfortable admitting. In Leroy, they thought they were dealing with a toxin, a virus, something concrete and external. Instead, they were confronting something more mysterious. The power of the human mind to create reality, to spread symptoms like contagion, to make entire communities sick through nothing more than stress, fear, and the deep human need to mirror what we see in others. The symptoms were real. The suffering was real. But the cause was inside their own minds all along. And that might be the most unsettling diagnosis of all.